Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Speak Smart podcast. Today, we're diving deep into the world of listening, but not just any listening. We're talking about how to zero in on those key pieces of information, those nuggets of pure insight.
Absolutely.
It seems like you've been exploring a podcast all about improving English listening skills, and I'm really eager to see what we can uncover together. Now, I'm particularly curious about why pinpointing this key information matters so much.
Well,
isn't just hearing enough.
it's tempting to think that simply hearing is the same as listening, but there's a world of difference.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're in a meeting.
Okay.
And someone is explaining a complex new project. If you're just passively hearing the words, they might as well be in another language.
It's like trying to build a house without a blueprint.
Exactly. But if you're actively listening for those key pieces of information, goals, the deadlines, the roles and responsibilities, you're suddenly equipped to not just understand, but also contribute and take action.
That makes perfect sense. It's about turning that stream of words into something meaningful and actionable.
Yeah.
So how do we go about doing that? Is there some secret formula for separating the wheat from the chaff?
Well, there's no magic bullet.
Okay.
But one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal is something called contextual listening.
Contextual listening.
It's all about using the situation, the relationship between the speakers, and the purpose of the conversation to filter what's most important.
It's like putting on a pair of X-ray glasses that let you see through the clutter and focus on what truly matters.
That's a great analogy. For example, imagine you at a friend's birthday party.
Okay.
The context is casual, the relationship is informal, and the purpose is purely social. In that situation, the key information might be things like shared memories, inside jokes, and well wishes.
Whereas in a job interview, the context is far more formal. The relationship is professional. And the purpose is to assess qualifications and fit. The key information there would be things like your skills experience and career goals.
Precisely. The same words can carry vastly different weight depending on the context in which they're spoken.
So context is key.
Yeah.
But once we've figured out what to focus on, how do we ensure we're actually absorbing those crucial details? Is it all about mental acrobatics and superhuman focus?
Well, there's definitely a mental component, but thankfully there are techniques we can use to make it easier. One of the most effective is something called active listening.
Active listening.
It's about going beyond passively hearing and engaging with the speaker in a way that helps you understand and retain the information.
So it's about being present in the moment.
Exactly.
Both physically and mentally.
And there are some practical strategies you can use to strengthen your active listening muscles. One that's particularly powerful is paraphrasing, putting what the speaker said into your own words.
So instead of just nodding along, you're actively processing the information and reflecting it back to the speaker.
Precisely. And this does a few really important things.
Okay.
First, it shows the speaker that you're truly paying attention and trying to understand. Second, it helps clarify any potential misunderstandings before they escalate.
It's like a safety net. That catches any misinterpretations before they cause a problem. I can imagine how valuable that would be in a high-stakes situation.
Absolutely. Imagine you're getting instructions from your boss about a critical project.
Okay.
If you paraphrase what they've said, you're not only confirming your understanding, but also giving them an opportunity to correct any miscommunications before they potentially derail the entire project.
It's almost like insurance against costly errors. And it sounds like this paraphrasing technique goes hand in hand with another powerful tool.
Yes.
Summarizing.
You're absolutely right. Summarizing involves taking those key pieces of information and condensing them into a concise overview. It's a way of double-checking that you've grasped the main points and ensuring everyone is on the same page.
It's like creating a mental snapshot of the most important takeaways.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a technique that's valuable in all sorts of situations.
Okay.
Think about attending a lecture or presentation. If you can summarize the key points afterward, you're far more likely to remember and apply that information later on.
It's like turning those fleeting thoughts into something solid and lasting. So we've got context and active listening, along with these powerful tools of paraphrasing and summarizing. Are there any other tricks of the trade we can use to become master listeners?
There's one more element that can really elevate your listening game.
Okay.
the ability to recognize and interpret verbal and nonverbal cues.
It's like learning to read between the lines.
Exactly.
Picking up on the subtle signals that add depth and nuance to the spoken word.
Let's start with verbal cues. These are the words and phrases speakers use to highlight key information. Things like, the main point is, or what's crucial here is, are like flashing neon signs pointing you towards those nuggets of gold.
It's like they're handing you a treasure map.
Precisely. And then there are emphasis words. Words like vital, significant, or essential that add weight and importance to the points being made.
It's like they're turning up the volume on those key ideas.
Exactly.
And making sure they stand out from the background noise.
And don't forget about repetition.
Repetition.
If a speaker repeats a particular point multiple times, it's a pretty good indication that it's something you need to pay attention to.
It's like they're underlining those key points in bold, making sure you don't miss them.
Now let's move on to nonverbal cues.
Nonverbal cues.
These are the unspoken signals that can add layers of meaning to a conversation.
This is where things get really interesting.
It is, in a way.
It's like learning to decode a secret language.
And it's a language that's spoken through body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and even things like eye contact and proximity.
So it's not just about what they say.
Precisely.
It's about how they say it.
For example, a speaker might lean forward, raise their eyebrows, and slow down their speech when they're about to deliver a key point.
Okay.
Or they might pause for emphasis before revealing a crucial piece of information.
It's like they're using their entire body to highlight those key moments in the conversation.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing is that these nonverbal cues often work on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
We pick up on them without even realizing it, but by becoming more conscious of them, we can significantly enhance our understanding of what's being communicated.
It's like having a sixth sense for communication.
In a way it is, and the more we practice recognizing these cues, the better we become at reading between the lines.
Yeah.
And grasping the full meaning of what's being said.
Right. So we've got context active listening, the power of paraphrasing and summarizing, and this fascinating world of verbal and nonverbal cues. But how do we take all of this knowledge and apply it in the real world?
That's a great question.
It's one thing to talk about it.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put these skills into practice?
And it's something the podcast you shared addressed in a really practical way. They broke it down by different scenarios, recognizing that effective listening looks different depending on the situation.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all. The techniques we use in a casual chat with friends will be different from those we employ in a high-stakes business meeting, job interview.
It's about tailoring our approach to the specific context.
Exactly.
So let's start with one of the most common scenarios. Professional meetings. The cornerstone of modern work life. But they can also be black holes for productivity.
Yeah.
If not handled effectively. So how can we apply these listening skills to make meetings more productive and meaningful?
The first step, perhaps surprisingly, happens before the meeting even begins.
So it's all about preparation.
Exactly. Taking the time to review the agenda and any relevant documents beforehand. Give you a head start. You'll have a clear understanding of the context, the key topics, and what you need to be listening for.
It's like having a roadmap. Before you embark on a journey, you're far less likely to get lost along the way.
And once the meeting is underway, there are a few key strategies you can employ. First, resist the urge to multitask. Put away your phone, close your laptop, and focus your full attention on the speaker.
It's about being present in both body and mind.
Exactly. And remember those active listening techniques we discussed.
So,
paraphrasing and summarizing. Don't be afraid to reiterate key points or ask clarifying questions if something isn't clear.
It's about making sure everyone is on the same page.
Precisely.
And that includes you.
And when it comes to note-taking, don't try to capture every single word. That's a recipe for information overload. Instead, focus on those key takeaways, action items, and decisions that are essential for moving forward.
It's about distilling that river of information into those precious nuggets of gold.
That's a great way to put it. And one final tip for meetings. Don't be afraid to speak up. Sharing your thoughts and ideas, even if they differ from the majority, can spark valuable discussions and lead to better outcomes.
It's about contributing your unique perspective and making your voice heard. Now, speaking of high-stakes situations, let's shift gears to another scenario where effective listening can make all the difference.
Okay.
Job interviews.
Job interviews.
A classic blend of excitement and nerves, and a situation where your listening skills can truly shine. It's not just about impressing the interviewer with your answers. It's also about demonstrating that you're a good listener.
Right.
So what are some key strategies for acing the listening portion of the interview?
Well, first and foremost, it's all about those nonverbal cues we discussed earlier, maintaining eye contact, nodding thoughtfully, and using verbal cues like "I see" or "That's interesting" shows the interviewer that you're engaged and attentive.
It's about conveying genuine interest and attentiveness
Exactly.
through both your words and your body language.
And just like in meetings,
Okay.
paraphrasing can be incredibly valuable in interviews. Reflecting back the interviewer's questions before answering not only ensures you understand what they're asking, but also buys you a little extra time to formulate a thoughtful response.
A double win. Clarity and composure.
And speaking of composure, another key tip is to pause before responding to questions.
Okay.
Resist the urge to blurt out the first thing that comes to mind. Taking a moment to gather your thoughts demonstrates that you're taking the question seriously and considering your response carefully.
It shows that you're thoughtful and deliberate,
Precisely.
not just trying to rush through the process.
And when it comes to the Q&A portion at the end of the interview, don't underestimate the power of asking insightful questions. This is your chance to showcase your curiosity, your research, and your genuine interest in the role and the company.
It's about shifting from passive listening
to
to active engagement.
And by asking thoughtful questions, you're not only gathering valuable information, but also leaving a lasting impression on the interviewer.
It's about demonstrating that you're not just there for any job. You're specifically interested in this opportunity and eager to learn more. So we've covered professional meetings and job interviews, two scenarios where the stakes can feel particularly high, but let's not forget that these listening skills are equally valuable in academic environments.
Absolutely. Whether you're attending lectures, participating in group discussions, or simply having a conversation with a professor, effective listening can make all the difference in your academic success.
So even though the setting might be different, those same core principles still apply.
Absolutely. Context active listening and recognizing cues are all crucial in academic settings. Let's start with lectures. Often a cornerstone of the college experience. So how can we apply these listening skills to make the most of those sometimes lengthy lectures?
Well, just like with meetings, preparation is key.
Exactly. Reviewing the assigned readings or lecture notes beforehand gives you a foundation of knowledge and makes it easier to pick out those key points during the lecture itself.
It's like building a mental framework upon which you can hang those new pieces of information.
Exactly. And during the lecture itself, pay close attention to those signposting phrases we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Professors often use phrases like "the main point is," or "in conclusion," to highlight key information.
It's like they're giving you a heads up
Precisely.
that something important is about to be revealed.
And don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions if something isn't clear. Professors appreciate engaged students who are actively trying to understand the material.
It shows that you're present and invested in the learning process. Now let's talk about group discussions.
Group discussions
Another staple of the academic experience.
are a fantastic way to learn from your peers and gain different perspectives on the material. But they can also be challenging if you're not an effective listener.
So it's not just about waiting for your turn to speak.
Exactly.
It's about actively engaging with what others are saying.
Resist the urge to formulate your next brilliant point while someone else is talking. Instead, focus on truly understanding their perspective. Ask clarifying questions. Offer thoughtful feedback.
Okay.
And build upon their ideas.
It's about creating a collaborative environment.
Precisely.
Where everyone feels heard and respected.
And just like in lectures, taking good notes is essential in group discussions.
Okay.
Capture those key insights, those aha moments, and those points of disagreement that can spark further exploration.
It's about turning those fleeting conversations into lasting knowledge. Now we've covered professional settings and academic environments, but what about our personal lives? surely we don't need to be so strategic when talking to our friends and family, right?
Well, it might not be as formal.
Okay.
The core principles of effective listening can actually strengthen our personal relationships as well. Think about it.
Wow.
How many arguments or misunderstandings could be avoided if we simply listen to each other more attentively?
It's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
So even though the stakes might not feel as high, these skills can still make a big difference in our personal lives.
Absolutely.
So how can we apply these listening skills to enhance our personal interactions?
Well, one of the most important things is simply being present.
Being present.
When you're talking to someone,
Okay.
put away your phone, turn off the TV, and give them your undivided attention.
It's about showing that you value their presence and their words.
Exactly. And remember those active listening techniques, paraphrasing and summarizing, reflecting back what you've heard, demonstrates that you're truly listening and trying to understand.
It's about showing empathy
Precise.
and creating a space where the other person feels heard and validated.
And don't be afraid to ask open-ended questions.
Open-ended question.
Encourage the other person to share their thoughts and feelings by asking things like, how did that make you feel? Or, can you tell me more about that?
It's about going beyond the surface level and really digging deeper. And of course, one of the most important things in any conversation, personal or professional,
Yeah.
is to avoid interrupting.
Absolutely. Let the other person finish their thought before jumping in with your own. It shows respect and allows you to fully understand their message before you respond.
It's about creating a space for dialogue,
Exactly.
not a competition to see who can speak first.
And finally, just like in those other scenarios,
Okay.
taking a moment to summarize and reflect after the conversation can be helpful. It reinforces your understanding and shows the other person that you are truly listening.
It's about taking those same active listening skills we've been exploring and integrating them into every aspect of our communication.
Precisely. Because whether we're in a boardroom, a classroom, or simply having coffee with a friend, the ability to listen effectively can transform our relationships and enrich our lives.
So how do we make sure we're actually putting all of this into practice?
That's a great question.
It's one thing to understand the theory, but how do we make it a habit?
And it's something the podcast offered some really practical advice on.
Okay.
They suggested starting small. Don't try to overhaul your entire communication style overnight.
Right.
Instead, pick one or two of these techniques, making paraphrasing or focusing on nonverbal cues, and make a conscious effort to use them in your everyday interactions.
So it's about taking those baby steps and building those listening muscles gradually.
Exactly. And they also recommended seeking out opportunities to really flex those listening muscles. Things like attending lectures or workshops, listening to podcasts or audiobooks with a critical ear, or even just having more intentional conversations with friends and family.
It's about actively seeking out those situations where we can hone our listening skills. So it's not just about passively absorbing information.
Yeah.
It's about actively engaging with it,
Yeah.
dissecting it, and really making it our own.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And one of the most effective ways to do that is through something called active recall.
Active recall.
It's a learning technique where you force your brain to retrieve information from memory, which actually strengthens those neural pathways and makes it more likely that you'll remember it in the long run.
That sounds fascinating. So instead of just rereading our notes or passively listening to a podcast, we need to actively try to recall the information afterward.
Exactly. So for example, after attending a lecture, you could try to summarize the key points to a friend or even just jot them down from memory. Or after listening to a podcast, you could pause at certain points and try to recall what was just discussed.
It's like giving your brain a workout.
Yeah.
And speaking of workouts, I love the idea of practicing these listening skills in a safe and supportive environment.
Yeah.
Are there any techniques for doing that?
Absolutely. One fun and effective method is role-playing.
Role-playing.
You could grab a friend, family member, or even a colleague and practice different scenarios. Maybe a mock job interview, a difficult conversation, or even just a casual chat where you focus on using those active listening techniques.
It's like having a dress rehearsal for real life.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the beauty of role-playing is that it allows you to experiment with these techniques in a low-pressure setting, get feedback, and build your confidence.
It's like having a personal listening coach in your back pocket. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the importance of context and active listening, to those subtle but powerful verbal and nonverbal cues. We've also explored practical strategies for applying these skills in various settings, professional, academic, and personal.
And we've even touched on some techniques for making these skills a habit, like active recall and role-playing.
It's been a fascinating journey into the world of effective listening. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, are there any common misconceptions about listening?
That's a great question
that we should address.
One of the biggest misconceptions is that listening is a passive activity, something we just do naturally without any effort. But as we've seen today, effective listening is anything but passive. It's an active and engaged process that requires conscious effort and practice.
It's about being present, being curious.
Exactly.
And being willing to really hear and understand what the other person is saying.
And another misconception is that listening is simply about absorbing information, like a sponge soaking up water. But effective listening is so much more than that. It's about connecting with the speaker on an emotional level, understanding their perspective, and responding in a way that builds trust and rapport.
It's about creating a space for genuine dialogue and understanding. I think it's a beautiful way to frame it.
I completely agree.
Listening as a way of connecting, empathizing, and building bridges of understanding.
And it's a skill that's more important than ever in today's world, where we're often so quick to judge, to interrupt, and to prioritize our own voices over others.
It's about shifting from a mindset of me versus you to a mindset of we.
And when we approach listening from that place of curiosity, empathy, and respect, we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities, deeper connections, more meaningful relationships, and a greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's about recognizing that listening is not just a skill.
Beautifully said.
It's an art form, a way of being present in the world and engaging with it in a way that's both enriching and transformative.
And it's an art form that anyone can master with a little bit of practice and a willingness to really listen.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the art of listening, I'm curious, what's one key takeaway that you hope our listeners will carry with them?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing to remember is that effective listening is a journey, not a destination. It's a skill that we can continually develop and refine throughout our lives.
It's about embracing that growth mindset.
Exactly.
And being open to learning and evolving as listeners.
And the more we invest in those listening skills, the richer and more rewarding our lives will become.
It's about recognizing that listening is not just something we do.
Beautifully said.
It's a fundamental part of who we are.
And it's a part of ourselves that we can always strive to cultivate and strengthen.
So as we conclude our exploration of this fascinating topic, what are some practical steps our listeners can take to start putting these skills into practice today?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to simply start small. Pick one or two of the techniques we discussed today, maybe focusing on paraphrasing, using those active listening cues, or even just putting away your phone when someone's talking to you, and make a conscious effort to integrate them into your daily interactions.
It's about taking those baby steps and building those listening muscles gradually.
Exactly. And remember, practice makes progress. The more you use these skills, the more natural they will become. And as you start to see the positive impact that effective listening can have on your relationships, your career, and your overall well-being, you'll be motivated to keep learning and growing.
It's about recognizing that effective listening is not just a nice-to-have skill. It's a fundamental part of living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing that in a world that's often so noisy and chaotic, the ability to truly listen to ourselves and to others is a gift, a superpower, and a source of endless possibility.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the art of listening, I thought it might be fun to do a little listening exercise just to put some of these techniques into practice.
I love that idea. It's one thing to talk about listening, but it's another to actually flex those listening muscles. What did you have in mind?
Well, I was thinking we could play a short audio clip, maybe a snippet from a podcast or news report. And then we can each try to identify the key information, those nuggets of insight that we've been discussing.
I'm game. Let's hear it.
Okay, wow. That was packed with information. What stood out to you?
The first thing that jumped out at me was the speaker's emphasis on the importance of adaptability in today's rapidly changing world.
Okay.
They used phrases like essential skill and critical for success, which really highlighted that point.
I noticed that too, and I also picked up on a nonverbal cue.
Okay.
The speaker's tone of voice became more urgent and passionate when they were talking about the need to embrace new technologies and ways of thinking.
That's a great observation. It's amazing how those nonverbal cues can add so much depth and meaning to the spoken word.
Yeah.
What else did you pick up on?
Well, the speaker also highlighted the importance of lifelong learning, the idea that we need to be constantly updating our skills and knowledge to stay ahead of the curve.
Right.
And they gave some concrete examples like online courses, industry conferences, and even just reading books and articles.
Excellent. You're really attuned to those key takeaways. And I think you've also demonstrated another important aspect of effective listening, the ability to connect the dots and see the bigger picture.
Okay.
You've not only identified those individual pieces of information, but you've also started to weave them together into a coherent narrative.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's not just about absorbing information in isolation. It's about understanding how those pieces fit together to create a more complete understanding of the world.
Exactly. And that's where those critical thinking skills come into play, the ability to analyze, evaluate, and synthesize information from multiple sources.
Right.
It's what separates passive listening from active engagement.
It's about becoming an active participant in the conversation, even if you're not the one speaking.
Beautifully said. And it's a skill that can be cultivated and strengthened with practice.
Yeah.
The more we engage in those active listening exercises like the one we just did, the more adept we become at extracting meaning, connecting the dots, and forming our own informed perspectives.
It's about empowering ourselves to become not just consumers of information, but critical thinkers and active agents of change.
I couldn't agree more. And it all starts with that willingness to truly listen to ourselves, to others, and to the world around us.
It's been an absolute pleasure diving deep into this topic with you today. I feel like I've not only learned some valuable techniques, but I've also gained a deeper appreciation for the transformative power of listening.
The feeling is mutual, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to embrace the art of listening and to make it an integral part of their daily lives.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of effective listening. We encourage you to keep practicing these skills, to stay curious, and to never underestimate the power of a listening ear. Until next time, keep those ears open, those minds engaged, and those hearts connected. Thank you for listening to the Speak Smart podcast.